So to gain access to the valves, we need to remove the valve cover. So let's go ahead. We just need to remove these 3 bolts that are on the top. They shouldn't be too tight. Okay. With the valve cover off, we can see inside the cylinder head. First, we can see that we have 2 rocker arms, one on the left and a second one on the right. And the rocker arms are acted on through push rods, which come up from the crankcase through the cylinder head, connect to the rocker arms, and then the rocker arms connect or act on the exhaust valve here on the left, and also the air fuel intake valve here on the right. The rocker arm assembly is secured to the cylinder head through 3 bolts, 1, 2 and 3. So once we remove those 3 bolts, we will be able to remove the rocker arm assembly. So you should be able to see here at the tip of my flathead screwdriver that there is a little clearance between where the rocker arm touches the tip of the valve. And we need to check or measure and adjust this valve clearance by sticking a little feeler gauge in there and measuring how large that gap is. If the gap is within tolerance as specified by the manufacturer, then all well and good, you don't have to do anything else. If that clearance is too large, you will have to adjust that valve clearance. So to adjust the valve clearance, you will loosen this bolt here, securing bolt, and then you will adjust it by turning either clockwise or anti-clockwise this little screw here at the tip. And that should increase or decrease the valve clearance. There's a lot of moving parts with the rocker arm up at the top of this cylinder head. We need to keep it lubricated with engine oil. So the way that is achieved is there is a little pump down lower in the engine, down here, and it is pumping the oil up through this little well here, or through this little reservoir. Okay, you can see that little groove in this well. That's where the oil is pumped into this well, and it comes up and it feeds into this little well here, which, as you can see, is sealed off with a little rubber oil seal. So the oil has nowhere to go except through that little small hole which you can see there in the middle of the picture, and that the oil then goes down this little tunnel which is cast into the valve cover. So you can see that the oil will flow down here, and then it will come down along this little chamber, this hollow chamber, and it comes out through these little outlets here. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then the oil will get sprayed onto the rocker arm assembly, and you can see that there is little holes in the rocker arms here. So there's one here and then there's one here, and they actually correspond with the where the oil is coming out from the valve cover. And that's that oil coming out, keeps the whole assembly lubricated and stops it all seizing up. So once that oil is sprayed out onto the rocker arm, it then flows down to the bottom of the head, cylinder head, and as you can see here, there's little holes at the bottom of the cylinder head which allow the oil to feed back down into the bottom of the cylinder, down through the cylinder, and then down into the crankcase itself, before then beginning the cycle again and getting pumped back up through the cylinder and relubricating again. Under the valve cover, the pressure underneath the valve cover, so in here, they should not be too excessive, okay? So for that reason, the only real pressure that should be underneath the valve cover is that of the oil getting pumped up from the crankcase. And for that reason, you can see that on the lid of the valve cover, it has a little rubber seal which runs around, and that's just an oil seal. I also wanted to draw your attention to this little bolt which is on top of the valve cover. So if we stick a socket on that little bolt and we turn it anti-clockwise to reverse out the bolt while the engine is running, we should see some oil slowly come out. So we don't need to undo the bolt the full way, we just need to reverse it out slightly until we start seeing oil flowing. And the whole point of this bolt is just to check that the oil pump is actually pumping the oil up through the cylinder, up through the reservoir in the middle of the cylinder, and that comes out here at the valve cover inside, and then flows down there and then sprays all over the rocker arm. So if we see oil coming out here, then we know that that is working. If we remove this cover here on the alternator, we should be able to gain access to the bolt at the end of the crankshaft, and we should then be able to crank the engine over manually, and you should be able to see the little rocker arm assembly moving up and down. So I'm going to go ahead, remove this little cover. It's just Phillips head screws. So it's just a little metal cover. It itself has a little oil seal. Put those bolts back on. And I can also remove this little cover here if I want to check the timing. So a little flathead screwdriver. This cover has a little oil seal. So with the cover off, I can put a little 14 socket on, and I can see in here there is a little bolt that's on the end of the crankshaft. Okay, and I can turn this anti-clockwise to turn the engine. Okay, so second person really, but it shouldn't take too much force. So as I turn it over, you can see now this rocker arm is moving upwards. It's already moved. So let's see what moves next. So then we have this rocker arm moving. And there we saw it went through a full motion. The push rod is acting on the rocker arm. So the push rod is pushing upwards, and that's forcing the rocker arm to go like this. And when it does that motion, the rocker arm pushes down on the valve. So it's pushing down, and that opens up the valve inside the cylinder head, on the other side of the cylinder head. And as you keep going, the push rod will now okay, so we saw there that the push rod released back down, so it stopped pushing on the rocker arm, so it went back down, and as a result the rocker arm could tip back this way, so it released the pressure on the valve, and the spring pushed the valve back closed. So with the valve cover off, I'm going to demonstrate the starter motor turning the engine over. Okay, so the lead coming from the starter motor, I have it connected up here to the positive terminal of a battery that I have set up, and I have the negative lead just here. Okay, so this negative lead, I'm just going to connect it to this little nutter bolt that's at the end of the starter motor, and we should be able to crank the engine over. So that's what we'd expect to see. We could see that the rocker arms are moving as the engine was being cranked over by the starter motor. So everything is working as it should, and hopefully the internals are all in order. Okay, so let's remove the rocker arm assembly. So we have to remove these 3 bolts here. So I've already loosened them. They're actually torqued down quite tightly, but I've just broken the tight bond already, so they're coming off easy enough. Tight. As you can see, these bolts have a little copper washer, and that copper washer is to create an oil seal. Okay. So we need to note the order that they come out, so that we don't put one of them, the one in the center should not go on left or right when it's reinstalled. It should go back in the center. So there's my 3 bolts removed. So with the bolts removed, it should be just fairly simple. to just lift up the whole rocker arm assembly. Okay, so there we have it. So there you can see the rocker arm. Why it's called a rocker arm? Because it just is a little arm that rocks back and forth. So again, this is the end that connects with the push rod. As you can see, it's just a loose fitting. It's just a little cap really that fits onto the push rod. And there we can see where I'd been talking about we might have to check for valve adjustments. This is where we would check the distance here. So these should be really very close to the actual head of the valve, or the top of the valve. And really that just taps down on the valve. Okay, so that's the rocker arm. Same on the other side. We have a rocker arm here. So it's just the two rocker arms on the rocker arm assembly. And that's it there. Okay, so I'm going to put the 3 bolts in where they came out. It's going to be easy to remember which way it went on. It doesn't go back on this way. It goes on this way. So that's out. Just leave that down for a second. So let's take a look at the push rods. They just come out as well. Quite easy. And again, we won't mix up the order in which they are meant to go. Although, in fairness, they're exactly the same, really. Okay, so now we can see a little bit better into the head of the top of the side of the cylinder head. So you can see the valves on their springs a little bit clearer. And now to remove the head, we need to undo these 4 bolts, third and a fourth there. Okay, so I have loosened those bolts. You would loosen them, you would turn them a quarter turn at a time when you're starting to loosen them up. Okay, so it's only a quarter turn at a time, and you would do it in a crisscross pattern. Okay, so you would start here, this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, and back here, then this one, this one, this one, and then this one. So you're doing it in a crisscross pattern. Okay, so once they're loose, you can just loosen them the whole way out. That's fully loose. Okay, and then there was this 5th bolt here, which I have just undone. Again, that one has a little copper washer on it. Okay, so that comes out. The little copper washer, which is there to create a little oil seal. Again, okay, so I don't even have to lift I shouldn't have to lift the bolts out. I need a little mallet just to give it a little bit of a tap. So I'm just using a little rubber mallet just to give it a gentle tap, because I don't want to damage the soft aluminium. resistance. No. So I can just give it a little bit of a tap here. Okay, so I can see a little bit of movement there. Just back and forth, keep tapping it. Nothing major. So I want the cylinder head to come free. Okay. There we go. Okay, so let me just feel. Okay. There we go. So the valves come with the cylinder head, as do the bolts. And you can see through.